Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, her plea for help was seen by millions around the world and changed her life. 1 year after she wrote a controversial blog post called I Am Adam Lanza's Mother, a conversation with Boisean Liza Long about stigma, regrets, and hope. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. On December 14th, 2012, television screens around the world were filled with scenes of confusion and then agony. Using his mother's rifle, Adam Lanza had massacred 20 children and 6 staffers at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. He had already killed his mother, Nancy Lanza, and would commit suicide as law enforcement arrived. All over the country, parents held their children closer, thankful they had not been victims, and many worried about security at their own schools. But Boisean Liza Long also carried another fear. That night, in a 750-word essay called Thinking the Unthinkable that she posted on her anonymous blog, Long wrote about her fear of her own son. I live with a son who is mentally ill, she wrote. I love my son, but he terrifies me. Long would go on to describe her son's rages and threats against her and her frustrating attempts to get him help. Her post was popular with her Facebook friends and was picked up by the Blue Review, an online journal at Boise State University. There, the editor changed the title to I Am Adam Lanza's Mother from a line in the piece, and he asked Liza to put her name on her work. She did, and then the post went viral. The essay quickly received more than 1 million hits, bogging down the journal's server. And over at the Huffington Post, which also carried the piece, it would receive more than 1 million likes on Facebook and 323,000 shares. Today, the piece on Liza's own blog site has more than 3 million views and nearly 4,000 comments. Some excoriate her for, in their view, violating her son's privacy and potentially tarnishing his future. But many also praise her for expressing their own views of their mentally ill children and for pushing for more mental health services. Now, the blog post was just the beginning of a whirlwind year for Long, who joins me in the studio to talk more about what has happened since her piece was published. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcia. I know this is an important issue for you as well.
Yes, we've done several documentaries on this issue, and I should mention before we start that I'm an unpaid member of the editorial board of the Blue Review, but was not involved in the choice to put your essay on the site. Well, what a year you've had. I had to write down everything so I didn't forget it. You've appeared on major network television programs, including Nova on PBS, which we'll talk about. You testified before a congressional committee. You're now on the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare's Children's Mental Health Subcommittee for this region. You gave a TEDx talk, and oh yes, by the way, you just happen to have also written a 300-page book.
Oh yeah, I wrote a book in my spare time.
Yes. And we should say you also have a full-time job as a manager of student services at Carrington College here in Boise. And all of this happened because of one blog post.
Right.
It's amazing.
And I can't tell you how to make your blog go viral. A lot of people ask me that, and I can tell you that you probably wouldn't want to if you could. But that being said, that moment, excuse me for tearing up, that moment when I wrote that essay, I found my voice. And I very much view myself as an accidental advocate for mental health. But for whatever reason, at a time when I felt scared and alone, I was able to put a voice to concerns for thousands of other families who are experiencing the same thing I was, and I didn't even know it. The same frustrations, the same fears. All of us want for our children a happy, productive future. No one wants to be Adam Lanza's mother.
Well, speaking of that line, I mentioned that the blog piece was retitled as that when it was picked up by the Blue Review.
It was.
Can you read the several paragraphs that include that line?
I can. This problem is too big for me to handle on my own. Sometimes there are no good options, so you just pray for grace and trust that in hindsight it will all make sense. I'm sharing this story because I am Adam Lanza's mother. I am Dylan Klebold's and Eric Harris's mother. I'm James Holmes's mother. I'm Jared Loeffner's mother. I'm Sung Hui Cho's mother. And these boys and their mothers need help. In the wake of another horrific national tragedy, it's easy to talk about guns, but it's time to talk about mental illness.
Take me back to that time when you saw Newtown on the screen. What was happening in your own life that prompted you to write this?
2 days before Adam Lanza went to the elementary school in Newtown, my own son pulled a knife on me when I asked him to return some overdue library books. And I know that seems like maybe a disproportionate response. He had flown into violent and unpredictable rages on more than one occasion. We had a safety plan in place. We acted on the safety plan, but ultimately my son was transported by hospital to the hospital to Intermountain here, and when I saw the news, my son was still really angry at me. He didn't understand why he was in the hospital. He wanted revenge. He had said some really frightening things, and he doesn't mean them. It wasn't him talking. But I just felt cold inside. My first thought when I heard the news about Adam Lanza was, what if that's my son someday? And of course, my second thought was, I want to rush to the elementary school and hold my other children. But that was my first thought. And I sat down that night and I put those thoughts and those frustrations and those fears, and we're talking several years of trying to get treatment and help for my son here. It just all came spilling out.
And your friend, Nathaniel Hoffman over the Blue Review, saw that it was popular on Facebook and asked to republish it, and he asked you to put your name on it. And you
Yes.
did. And that provoked quite a bit of criticism from people. On the one hand, you had lots of people who wrote in and said, thank you for describing my own situation. But a very high-profile writer started lambasting you for having put your name on it and also put a picture of your son when he was much younger on the blog.
Right. And you know, I guess you've said something important if Hannah Rosen decides to take aim at you. So I think that's how I process that experience. But I do want to share how I came to that process of putting my name on the blog. It was really something that Nate said to me. We talked it through and he said, look, until someone's willing to put a name on one of these stories, they're not real. Most people who blog about mental illness have traditionally blogged anonymously, and it's because of one word, it's stigma. So to my mind, what I realized through that process, and I do feel that Hannah Rosen makes some important points about privacy, by the way, and I did use a pseudonym for my son, and continue to do so. I call him Michael, and that is not his real name. The picture dates several years back. You would not recognize him from that picture today. That being said, even Michael and I have several conversations about when and whether it's important for him to take ownership of his own story. I don't feel like that's a choice that I should make for him. That's his own choice. But he's becoming a very powerful advocate for himself, and I hope that he'll continue on that path.
And in fact, he appeared, although his face was masked or blurred, in a Nova documentary.
He did.
With a rather sensational title, A Mind of a Rampage Killer, which I don't think you like, but the content in it, I believe you like, and it's about the science of the brain. And let's listen to a quote that your son gave Miles O'Brien.
What happens when you have a rage?
Your mind goes blank. You think about nothing but getting revenge on the people that have hurt you. You lash out and do violent things. It's very hurtful, and afterwards you may be incredibly tired and basically depressed.
Wow.
You feel really bad about it, but you know that there's not really anything you can do to make up to the people you hurt during those incidents. And you can't control yourself when you're like that, and no one else can. When you get like that, you just want to get the heck away from anyone in the area. It's kind of like a werewolf. When a werewolf turns into a werewolf, it doesn't know who he is, it doesn't know where he is, it just wants to hurt and fight people.
So you feel like there's another person inside almost.
Basically.
Scary.
Yes.
He says it's scary. It's scary for him. It's out of his control. He's very articulate in describing what it feels like to have these sensations of rage take over for him. He's smart.
He's a wonderful child, very articulate, has a great deal of insight into his own condition. And it was not our plan to use him in that Nova documentary, but as he got to know Miles better, and he really likes Miles, he likes science. Miles is a science reporter, and he came up to Miles and said, I want to tell them what it's like. I want to tell people what it's like. And Miles and I were both blown away as we watched him share just how hard it is for him and how he struggles and how frightening it is for him, because it's really frightening to be in that state.
And I think you said that Miles even let him choose the amount of blurring on his face, so he had some involvement in it.
He did.
But when your son first heard about this blog piece and he was still in the hospital, what was his reaction? Because some people, Sarah Kendzior, who's another blogger, said her child's privacy and reputation have been irrevocably damaged. If he gets the help he needs, he will still have his mother's cruel words, and her words, follow him online for the rest of his life.
Right. And Sarah, again, makes some really important points about privacy. I'm going to say that right up front. And also, I was able to reach out to Sarah privately. She has a lot of integrity, and she makes some really important points. I don't think we can always completely judge a situation based on 750 words. And I think in the case of both Sarah and Hannah Rosen, perhaps there was a jump to judgment because they wanted to make a point about privacy. I realized very quickly I wanted to make a point about stigma. And Michael feels the same way. We feel like, to some extent, what they say could be true, but that's a problem maybe with the world we live in, rather than a problem with us sharing our story about mental illness, because this is something that affects millions of people in the United States. It's 1 in 5 children in the United States right now who has a serious and debilitating mental disorder. That's right from the National Institute of Mental Health website. You can go look it up.
And suicide rates are high.
Oh, yeah, especially in Idaho. I think we're 6th this year per capita for suicide rates. So, and suicide actually kills more than 4,600 children every year. So young people and children between the ages of 10 and 24. That's how serious this problem is. And to my mind, not talking about it means we're never going to get help. We cannot get a solution to a problem until we can talk about that problem.
And you've talked about the need for more mental health services. You also mentioned when you read this that moms need help too. What did you mean when you said, I am Adam Lanza's mother? Because of course, a new report has come out talking about how many guns she had,
right.
And you do not allow guns in your house. You are not her in that respect.
Very much not. I'm happy that my son and I share interests in writing and Greek mythology and history. Those are interests that we share, and we do not share an interest in guns, and really even violent video games, which that's its own subject. But that being said, guns are a complicated issue for me. I'm just going to lay it out there. I don't think that the solution to this problem is as simple as saying, well, let's just ban guns. In fact, you and I have discussed this, Marcia. I worry that background checks can even contribute to stigma, especially in states where gun ownership is a part of life, states like Idaho. If you tell people that they're going to have to disclose mental illness, they're not going to disclose mental illness. So it's going to be an additional barrier in an area where we already have several barriers to access to care.
So how did you feel that you were like Adam Lanza's mother to put that line in there?
I think what I wanted people to realize, and thank you for pointing that out, my son, you asked about his reaction. In the hospital, I went to see him that night, and he said, Mom, did you compare me to a serial killer? And I want to make it really clear that I did not compare my son to a serial killer. In fact, if you read the essay, you see, I think, my love and admiration for my very bright little boy who loves Harry Potter and snuggle animals, and that's the little boy that he wants to be. Well, he's growing into a young man now, but that's the boy he wants to be. It's not that person he described in that quote. That frightens all of us. What I meant was, I cannot imagine that Nancy Lanza held her newborn baby in her arms and said, "I hope you grow up and kill 21st graders someday." No mother wants this for her son. What I also knew instinctively about Nancy Lanza was that she had struggled to get help for her son, and in fact that is true. She had struggled for years to get help for her son. So the point I wanted to make is mothers need help for their children.
Many men write about this subject. Several men have written prominent books about this. Do they get the same backlash that you did?
I'd honestly like to look into it. It seems to me that it's easier to write about this subject if you're a man. I think people do still criticize writers, but I'm thinking about the book January 1st about a man who just, I'm blanking on the author's name, but he describes his daughter with schizophrenia, or The Amazing Beautiful Boy by David Schaff, or Far from the Tree by Andrew Solomon, and of course Pete Early's Crazy. Which I recommend everyone read.
I believe here on the dialogue set before long.
If you want to know how we treat mental illness in this country and you want to be shocked, read Crazy. It's a good book.
Now, one of the positive results of all the attention given was that mental health professionals reached out to you.
Yes.
And one in particular, and talk about your son today.
Right. So in the initial aftermath, there were so many comments and so many people reached out, but one person was very persistent. She kept trying to reach out to me through Nate Hoffman at the Blue Review, and finally thought, I'm just going to take this call. Her name was Alyssa Bronstein, and she's a researcher with the Juvenile Bipolar Foundation, and I had never thought about bipolar disorder for my son at this point. It had not crossed my mind. We had had several other diagnoses, tons of medications. I think in my book I go through the litany of medications. But she reached out to me and she said, Dr. Papolis, who has this foundation, would like to talk to you. So I took a phone call in January and he said, your son has bipolar disorder.
And you went to see him? And
we did. We set up an appointment, and interestingly enough...
He's in Connecticut, by the way.
He is. Interestingly enough, in the interim, so as he had said this, and I said, well, let's make an appointment. We made an appointment. Michael ended up back in the hospital. And he was diagnosed in the hospital prior to that appointment with juvenile bipolar disorder.
And he takes lithium, which has been...
It's a game changer for us. I think he would say the same thing. And so I went from being this frustrated mother after years and years of trying to get help for my son to effective medications, the right diagnosis, I would say. And there's a lot of stigma attached to that diagnosis, which is why I think even in the medical community, people will back off from it or they're resistant to it. It's a controversial diagnosis for children, to be completely honest. But for my son, having that diagnosis, being on lithium, also having wraparound services that he's received through the Department of Health and Welfare.
Occupational therapy works really well for you.
Great for him.
Yeah. For him, rather, yeah. But it's not easy to get and it's limited. So now, other opportunities came your way as well. A TEDx talk in San Antonio, which will be online before long, and we'll certainly link to that. What was that experience like? And
that was...
What was the theme of your talk?
Well, it was stigma. I think that's what makes sense. And what I did was I compared mental illness to cancer. And I chose that because it's interesting you brought up the picture of my son earlier. I realized one day I was standing in the grocery store line and I saw a picture of a beautiful little boy who had childhood leukemia, which is the leading cause of cancer death for children. And I gave $1. Everyone does. And as I left the store, I thought, nobody would ever put a picture of a child with mental illness in a grocery store checkout line. And for parents and families who are struggling with this kind of thing, like when my son was in the hospital, people don't bring casseroles for that. We have communities and support networks for people with physical illness, but if the illness is from here to here, we just, don't talk about that.
Because of fear of violence.
Sure. Yeah, I think the fear is
That does
real.
make it a little bit different, though. That's probably why it's treated that way.
Well, I think we need to make the argument that it's organic, just like from here to here. From here to here is organic, so maybe...
And that statistics show most people with mental illness harm themselves, right?
Well, not even harm themselves. Most people are not. Most are not violent.
They're not violent, but if they're going to do harm,
self-harm is definitely a greater risk.
But there were some negative results in your own family of this. It's been difficult for you to see two of your other children because of a court order.
Right, yeah, and I've got to say I'm frustrated with the system, and I know a lot of families who are frustrated with the system. In my case, a judge signed an ex parte order, meaning I was not notified, and so that severely limited access for my younger two children to their brother, which of course then also meant for me, since I have the physical custody of Michael, and it was really devastating on my family. I have thought many times, if I had known that would happen, would I have put my name on the blog? And the answer today, even with all of the good that's come of it, is no. It was not worth the price. I don't get that year back with my younger two children, and neither does Michael, and they're very close.
The other thing that happened was that you were contacted by several book publishers to write a book.
Yes.
Initially only about your situation, but you broadened it out. I mean, was there a bidding war even on this? I can't remember.
Oh, well,
it was a major imprint. Penguin,
right?
An imprint of Penguin is taking it, and it'll be published sometime in 2014.
Yes, yeah.
But your book looks at the broader.
Right. It's not a memoir. Yeah, it's not a memoir at all. I really wanted to look at the barriers to access to care. That's really, because it was something that affected me. I was really curious. Why is it so hard for us to get care? Why is it so hard to get a diagnosis? If you took your child to the doctor and your child had a stomach ache and it took 7 years to find out why, I think you'd be frustrated. And there's a lot of parents like this.
It's called The Price of Silence.
It is, The Price of Silence. Right.
Why the title?
Because stigma destroys children, families, and communities. And you saw that firsthand in the documentaries that you made, just the huge impact that this has on lives. We have the very visible sign in Newtown, and that's where our communities pay a price. I do not excuse Adam Lanza's behavior at all. I do not. But at the same time, if his mother was really trying to receive treatment for him and care for him, and that wasn't available in the community, we saw the same thing with Aaron Alexis in the Navy Yard shooting. He was screaming for help, and now 13 people are dead. And so we need to have a system that is not reactive, but is proactive in providing care. That was the book.
When those instances that you mentioned happen and have happened since Newtown, what happens to you when you see them, whether it's in Virginia or at the...
The one that hit me hardest was Gus Deeds. Quite frankly, because I think that's every parent of a child with mental illness's worst nightmare. Not that his son attacked him, but that his son completed suicide. And I think I remember his tweet.
Is this
Cray Deeds, Senator Cray Deeds, yeah. And his tweet after he got out of the hospital, he has to live with this pain of losing his son, and they were very close. And that's my own worst nightmare as a mother, that I would lose my son to this illness.
And going back to the TEDx talk where you talked about this, we talked about stigma. Mm-hmm. It's what was that like? It'll now be online soon for potentially millions of people to watch.
It was really one of the most amazing weekends of my life, to be honest, Marcia, because first of all, my fellow speakers, to be with people who are so passionate about things.
The theme, we should say,
Minds Wide Open.
Is Minds Wide Open.
And it was Minds Wide Open, and to get to meet those people, to see their energy, their passion, and then to be able to share my own experiences with mental health, it was truly amazing. You always wonder when you have to give a speech like TED. I will say, for those of you who've watched TED, I'm a longtime TED fan, but it's kind of hard to put all of that into a 15-minute, all of it. It's a 15-minute soundbite, right? Okay, that's essentially what TED is. And to get all of it in there, and I wondered also, you don't get to have paper in front of you. It's you on a stage in front of 500 people or so, and you always wonder. I'm not a public speaker by training. What's that going to be like? So I thought, will I get nervous? I don't know. I stepped on that stage, and in my mind I thought, if I give 75% of the best talk I've ever done, I'm going to be fine with that. And it just happened for me. It was 100-something plus percent. It just was there. I felt like it was the moment to speak. Someone said to me afterwards, a random man came up and gave me a hug and said, "I felt the world shift when you spoke." And that's what we have to do, because when we look at stigma, when we look at, me talking about my son, we've got to end stigma. We have to. So if the world really shifted, then this was all worth something.
And I know you're going to have another book after that one too. So this is you call yourself an accidental advocate.
Very much so.
As we wrap up, I would be remiss in not asking you about your own state. I know you've testified at least one hearing here in Idaho. What do you think the real needs are here in Idaho for children's mental health services?
We have really some good things in place. It's just the way we think about it. So the way we think about services right now, we tie them, unfortunately, for children to the juvenile justice system. I think that's unfortunate, and I think juvenile justice would say the same thing. That's unfortunate. There are just a lot of barriers in access to care. So we know that children like my son need wraparound services, but private health insurance doesn't pay for them.
And that would be occupational therapy, it would be
PSR,
psychosocial rehab,
right,
so that he can learn how to function in public settings.
Right. These types of services are just hugely beneficial for children. But right now, in many cases, you either have to access these services through juvenile justice, which my son has done, unfortunately, or you can get
in other words, trying to have him arrested or having him arrested.
Oh, yeah.
So that he goes into the juvenile justice system and
right,
there gets services.
People didn't want to believe that when I wrote that in my blog, but it's true. The social worker absolutely said,
I've
well,
seen that
you need to press charges so that your son can get those services you all need again. And I have good health insurance and a great employer, but lots of families are in my shoes where I've even personally been told, well, you should quit your job and go on Medicaid so you can get services for your son. That wouldn't be good for my own mental health. I'm going to say I really love my job, but I don't think it's fair for families to have to make choices like that. It's just not fair. So what could we do? We just need to be a whole lot more proactive, a whole lot less reactive. We need to find ways to get families into the system sooner, training pediatricians, getting early interventions in place. These things actually work. I saw that as I researched my book. Things like Clarity Guidance Center down in San Antonio, Child Mind Institute in New York. These things work. They have solutions.
We have only 30 seconds or so left. Talk to parents out there who are listening to you. What should they do?
You're not alone. If you're out there, you're not alone. And what you should do is you should find other families. Join the Idaho Federation of Families. Look at Idaho Parents Unlimited. There are lots of resources out there, but first you have to say, I need help. And then you've got to go and join other families. We all need to speak up for our kids. And that's how we will change things in Idaho and across the nation.
So there is a help out there. We will link those websites to our website on Dialogue. Thank you so much. We'll have a web extra with more information. You've been listening to Liza Long. She's the author of a blog post called I Am Adam Lanza's Mother, and now is an advocate for children's mental health services. I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning into this edition of Dialogue. For more information, go to the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.